Pastor Kevin Young. Welcome.
Thanks for having me here, Chris.
You're welcome. You are on deck. My mom loves it the way I say that, apparently. You are on deck. It just flowed out of the idea. Kevin, today's the first day that we're meeting, and I'm very excited and intrigued about this conversation because, well, for a number of reasons. One, the majority of the episodes that we've done thus far have been with our crew or some of our clients. And so from a subject matter perspective, this is the first episode where we're going to be veering out into some new territory. So I'm really excited about that. So
yeah, it should be interesting. I'll try not to be too churchy.
Hey.
In fact, I heard you say the word pastor, and I thought, wait, is he talking about me?
Yes, I am talking about you. Now, again, as I said, we're just meeting today, and what has brought us together is my mom's, for lack of better terminology, life partner, Buck, is a friend of yours.
That's right.
And if we were to go back about two years ago on Easter, my wife and daughter and I were staying with my mom and Buck, and we attended a Sunday service.
Did you really?
Yes, at your previous church. So I have some experience in your area of expertise and have been able to witness you doing what you do. And now I know that you are creating, for lack of better terminology, your own ministry. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. We're doing something quite different than I was probably doing 2 years ago that you experienced.
Tell me why don't you tell us a little bit more about what it is that you're beginning to create right now?
Yeah, Chris, I kind of had this revelation over the last year or so that a lot of my frustrations with church and with Christians were things that I think were maybe things that were maybe given by God. And as I started looking back into the Bible, frankly, what I noticed was the way a lot of us do church, the way I was doing church is it's not very biblical. And so kind of in COVID, had to reframe and rethink some things, and it sent me on this journey of really rethinking what church should be and what Christianity should be. And I ended up kind of discovering this thing that church is really more about sitting around the table like this, talking with friends, eating with people, sharing life together, than it is an hour on Sunday sitting in a pew listening to some guy in a collar yell at you.
Right. Well, it's I think there's is the word kismet, is it a Hebrew word? The word kismet, there's it means sort of like magical or coincidental. And when I spent some time looking at your website and then watching some of your YouTube videos, I was immediately drawn to what you're just saying, which is there is a theme that you are communicating about celebration, about the importance of gathering together to eat food or to share a drink and to share that type of community, and that, according to what you're saying right now, is really the ideal environment to share the message of Christianity, the message from God, the story of the life of Jesus Christ. And I thought, well, that's so really cool that this conversation is going to happen now, because on every one of our episodes that I've recorded so far, it doesn't matter who I'm talking to, at some point in time, the conversation naturally steers towards this fundamental thing that we all share, different races, cultures, creeds, sexual orientations, doesn't matter, which is the joy and pleasure of gathering together as people over a meal and sharing that community, whether it's with family or friends. And I thought, well, that's really a nice entrance into our conversation here.
Yeah, I think honestly it's something that we are wired within to do. You can't turn 2 pages in the Bible without tripping over, some sort of a feast or a festival, some sort of a party going on.
Right.
And if, I were to ask you, Chris, who are the most lively, excited joyful people that you can think of, you're probably not going to say Christians, which to me is like, we've totally missed the whole point of life.
Right.
The way God created it, I think God created us to experience joy. And maybe it's because I was raised in the Midwest, with a grandma who loved to cook, but there is no more joyful place to me than a table filled with food.
I want to continue on that. I'm going to pause just for a second and ask Greg. I've done this again. We've started with the air conditioners on. So, Greg, if you could please ask Donna to turn the ACs off, because we're getting, temperature-wise, we're fine, but we're getting blasted by a sound here. So this is how we roll. Sometimes I spill something on the table. Sometimes we got to take a little time out. So let's pick up on that theme, right? And so first off, I am a Christian. I was baptized Catholic. And so I would say that I still identify as Catholic, although I have a hard time really saying that because I'm not practicing. I believe in the Lord Jesus Christ, and I believe in the teachings to what I understand. But I'm very far. I'm removed from it to some degree. And so when you say perhaps people don't think Christians are the most fun people, I don't know yes or no, but I think what you're saying is that the message over the years has been communicated in such a way that it's taken the joy out of it for a lot of people. And I looked on your website, and one of the top things on the website is how many people have left the church over the years and how many continue to do so. And I would imagine from your perspective, that's something that is disheartening.
Yeah, 65 million. 65 million people who once considered themselves practicing Christians in the United States no longer do. And now, each year, 2.7 million more walk away from the church every single year. When a lot of people hear that, I think that they think, or a lot of church people hear that, they think, well, they're walking away from God. I'm not so sure. Because as I began to have conversations with a lot of my friends who were strongly practicing Christians throughout their early years, college years, I realized that most of them had walked away from the church. And one of them said to me, I don't think I'll ever walk back into a church again unless it's for a funeral. And I just was shocked by that, because to me, this person had more faith than I did as a pastor. And so it really kind of reframed for me, I think, faith in God in this way. You don't have to go to church to be a person of faith. And then I thought, well, what good is church? What use is church? And then I realized we actually have translated that wrong. Church is not a building. Church is not a place. Church is not where you go to on Sunday morning. Actually, in the Bible, the word church simply means a group of people. Just a group of people. When we use the word church, we think of a building. When the Bible uses the word church, it just means a group of people. And so that's what we're trying to do, is just encourage people to find other groups of people like them and just enjoy conversations and enjoy food. So
strategically, how do you make that happen, right? If there's such this preordained notion of what church is supposed to do or be, and you're breaking out of that to create something that perhaps is more appropriate or meaningful in people's lives in this day and age, how do you actually go about making that happen?
Well, we're still learning. That's the first thing. There aren't a lot of models of this out there.
Right.
What I think, though, is really teaching people that you can do this on your own. You can learn about God on your own. You can lead your family on your own. You can create inroads in your community and conversations of faith with other people. And for me, I'm not trying to save souls. I'm not trying to win people to Jesus. I'm not trying to rack up an attendance number. I think, honestly, what God's desire for all of us is that we become fully human, that we become fully who we were designed to be. And my hope is to teach people ways in which they can accomplish that on their own, maybe with my help, maybe without.
What would you say are some core fundamentals of what that means? If you're saying, what God would intend us or desire us to be as human beings, what do you look at as the cornerstones of what that means?
I think people of love,
Mm-hmm.
people of peace, people of joy, and people of hope.
Important messages, particularly in this time right now. And I think most people understand that fundamentally, right? That love is so powerful, and joy is so powerful, and peace is so meaningful. And I this is such an open-ended question that we could go on for days about, but what breaks that down in the human experience? What starts to take that away that we constantly, because I'm going through this myself right now, sort of a rediscovery of certain aspects of my life where I'm saying it's so easy to fall away from what seems to be so simple in humanity.
I wish I had the silver bullet.
Right.
I'll tell you though, for me, one of the things that really happens is I get out of balance in life.
Mm-hmm.
I start chasing things that are good, but maybe not things that are best. My margins become thinner in life. When my margins become thinner, I become frustrated. I get angry with my kids a lot more often. I'm not as happy or as joyful as I feel like I should be. I'll start chasing work, putting in way too much hours, way too much of my time and energy into those things, and other things fall through the cracks. Baseball games with my kids fall through the cracks. Spending time on weekends with family rather than at work fall through the cracks. Family dinners fall through the cracks. And so for me, a lot of times what distracts us and destroys us are not things that are bad,
right,
but maybe things that need to be in more moderation.
Well, and I would guess that your work and your devotion to the work and learning and sharing the word, if you will, with multiple people or whoever you can, that's a meaningful and passionate pursuit for you, right?
It is, but I can still spend too much time doing that.
Yeah, I mean, I
too little time with my family, or
gotcha,
or connecting with other people,
right? So even something really positive can be something that detracts from the balance and the harmony of your life.
Yeah, that happens a lot. God can become a drug, or religion can be a drug, and it can inoculate you against the real world around you, and you get out of balance.
Mm-hmm. We were talking a little bit as I was showing you around the agency before we got started. And so you gave me a little insight, but I'm curious, at what point in your life did this desire or awakening or whatever you would call it inside of yourself happen, where you said, this is something that is meaningful to me and I want to dedicate my life to?
Chris, I always knew I wanted to help others. I always knew I wanted to do something important and do something meaningful with my life. I think as far as, I think pastoring is what we were talking about,
sure,
if I remember correctly. Never wanted really to be a senior pastor. And so I actually ended up with a double major in college, theology and visual communications.
Okay.
And I ended up staying with that visual communications work and spent a couple of decades in churches doing audio, video, lighting, eventually website design and all those things. And what I realized, I think, Chris, was I was fearful of what it meant to be a pastor. And so I had all this love for technology, but I was using it to help people. But this whole ministry thing, being a leader, being up in front of people, I didn't feel like I was cut out for it. I didn't feel like God could use me. So I had this real self-image issue about myself. And I woke up one day and I just kind of realized I think I'm running from what God has wired me to do and called me to do and gifted me to do. And it's funny. Jesus, they say, was crucified at the age of 32 or 33, and that's exactly whenever I made that change to 32, 33, and I kind of joke and say Jesus got the cross and I got the pastorate of a church,
right?
And I'm not sure which was more painful.
Interesting.
It was it was awful. It was awful because all of these people who many times we're supposed to be better people for being godly people,
right?
We're just like everybody else, in the world. They have the same issues, the same problems, the same anger, the same ability to just cut you down for having done nothing. And sometimes those people were even worse. And I'm like, I'm a pastor, I can fix this. And so I spent a few years trying to fix people and realized that doesn't work either.
Mm-hmm.
And at that point, you're just like, okay, God, it's yours. I'm just going to do what you've called me to do and just trust you with everything else. And that worked for a while until I started becoming a little disillusioned with the process of church. And that kind of led up to where we began, where kind of walked away from the institutional church and said, I think there's a better way
Mm-hmm.
to help people. And I think that there's a more biblical way to help people. And so, yeah.
If I may, I want to just back up just for a second, just to get a little clarification on your process or your pathway. When you were young, was your family particularly involved with the church? Was there something that stimulated this for you so that when you went to college, you had a dual major of theology and the visual arts?
Yeah, absolutely. I grew up in church. I was that kid running around the hallways that everyone's yelling about, stop running in church. You're not supposed to run in church. I don't know. I don't think God cares, but they cared.
Right.
My mom was a church secretary. Dad was a deacon in our independent, fundamental, Bible-believing Baptist church, which really just kind of meant don't do anything joyful.
The Lord will strike you down.
Yeah, I wasn't allowed to touch playing cards. I didn't.
Oh gosh.
I didn't go to a movie theater until I don't know. I think high school, and I felt guilty for doing it because you weren't supposed to go to movies. Now you could rent movies and watch them in your home, but that was different. But legalism is fraught with all kinds of inconsistencies. So
right.
Don't need to talk about the inconsistencies. But yeah, I was raised in that kind of home. But over the years, I saw, mom working in church. I saw part of the reason I didn't want to be a pastor is because I saw behind the scenes what pastors endure.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't want that. It was too painful. I wanted to run away from that.
What did you see them enduring that seemed so negative to you or fearful?
By and large, really great people who were not appreciated for what they did.
Mm-hmm.
Oftentimes were attacked and lied about. Imagine any workplace environment,
right?
Where you're working in customer service or working with people, and the church can be a lot the same as that. Mm-hmm. And it was disappointing, to me as a kid, and it still kind of is today in a lot of ways. And maybe that's why, in some ways, I'm trying to do something different.
Does some of that disappointment, not in yourself, but perhaps I might use the wrong words, but from your congregation, if you will, is it because there's such high expectations amongst people who attend church and have their own desires to develop this side of their life? Do they have unrealistic expectations of what you're able to do, or is it that everybody has their predefined what it's supposed to be like, and if you don't meet that definition, then it's a struggle?
Yeah, I think it's probably the second one, mm-hmm. Chris. In a lot of ways, too, I think everybody tends to know or think they know what God wants and how to do things correctly. I would never, most people would not show up in your place of work and tell you how to do your job. They don't have any idea mm-hmm. how to do your job and how to do it well. In a church, everybody kind of feels like they know how to do it,
right.
How to do it well. And I think in some small ways, they like to play God in a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what makes it difficult. But, the truth of the matter is people are messy. Lives are messy. I mean, you're dealing with people who are going through medical issues all the time. You're dealing with people who are going through relationship and divorce issues all the time. You're going through, you're working with people who are struggling with depression and loneliness, who are trying to parent their kids well Sometimes those kids are 5 years old. Sometimes those kids are 50 years old. And so whenever you come into the church, you're not just coming there to learn about God. You're coming there in order to do life together, and doing life together means there has to be some level of vulnerability. And I think when church works well, it's when everybody is able to be vulnerable with what they're struggling with and just say, here's who I am. This is me. Accept me for who I am and where I am, and let's just do life together. But if church is wired to where you've got to show up and put on the face and kind of pretend that everything's okay and set all of those things aside in order to do this for an hour, it's not going to work well.
It's interesting that you say that. Vulnerability is something that most people have difficulty with, myself. I think we all do, But I find that in almost any situation, whether it's with yourself or with your wife or spouse or whoever, or friends, when you allow yourself to be most vulnerable around people that you care about, it seems to be the environment that creates almost the most pleasure and joy, right? Because so many people do have uncountable struggles that they might be going through, or problems or issues or whatever, or just day-to-day life. And yes, we all feel that we need to kind of put on this front and, and behave a certain way. And then as you do that, you start sort of defining everything around you by this image that you're projecting. And then you find yourself in an environment where the very nature of what it is that would be ideal to share in Christianity or any religion, which is the fundamental experience of being together and discussing what it means to be alive and what are these unanswered questions that we seek the knowledge for. That happens best when everybody's got their guard down and their mind open, right? And their heart.
Yeah, you've hit on, I think, Chris, something that's super important. I mean, I wish, honestly, I had a piece of paper here because I'd be taking notes about it.
Well, the good thing is we're recording all of
it. I'll watch it back later. It's really tough to be vulnerable. Two things I thought of when you were talking. It's really tough to be vulnerable whenever somebody's telling you that you were created wrong. Sin. A lot of people struggle with God or with church or with vulnerability because they don't feel like they can be themselves in church because they're going to be told that they're broken.
Mm-hmm.
And so who would want to be a part of anything where they show up and they can't be who they are or they can't be vulnerable because they're going to be told they're broken or they're sinful or they need to change. The other thing that I was thinking was, you mentioned for a moment the Catholic Church, and so much I think about vulnerability has to come from the top. If you don't have a pastor or don't have a church or a leader who is modeling and being vulnerable and transparent themselves, if they're not being who they are, brokenness, problems at home and all, no one else is going to who's around them. And this is one of the things about the Catholic Church that has caused a lot of people a lot of frustration over the years is there's no vulnerability. It's just you're a part of the process or you're not, or you can be gone. And Pope Francis has totally revolutionized in a lot of ways people's view of the Catholic Church because he's a guy who, for whatever reason, just exudes vulnerability and an ability to just kind of say this is wrong or this is not okay or even just I'm struggling with this. To have a pope who's willing to say that gives me a lot of hope.
I find his papacy, if you will, and I don't follow it tremendously, but to be more hopeful just in the sense that he came representing, he was a Jesuit, right? Is that correct? And so he came from perhaps a different methodology or thought process, certainly much more humble. And, but the Catholic Church, it is a global institution, right? And it is like any other gigantic corporations with its power plays and politics, and this is the way it's done, and we don't do it that way. And I can't imagine how frustrating it must be for him at times to try and figure out how do you lead this organization with so much history that, quite frankly, there's that debate, like, should they change or do you just stay the course? But to your point on your website, people are leaving, and not just the Catholic Church, people are leaving church, and I think people are leaving church because this rigid notion that believing in God or worshiping has to follow this rule set, or as you said, which I still find just mind-boggling, this whole thing, if you do something, you're a sinner, you're wrong, you're broken. I am no expert on this, but it certainly seems to me that if the message of the teaching of Jesus Christ is to be of love and understanding and compassion for one another, we're all experiencing that from the top to the bottom.
Yeah.
As you said, you saw the very top, and you saw the same issues, the same problems, top to bottom, because we're all human beings struggling with what it means to be human and deal with these challenges.
Yeah. The people who Jesus said were broken, sinful, and needed to change were the religious people.
Right.
It wasn't everybody else. Whenever he leveled those criticisms, it was at the religious people.
So what happens? What happens in this cycle of anybody who enters into, let's call it a life of devotion to God, regardless of the religion? You start off as a young person with sort of maybe a wide-eyed wonder and this desire, feeling that you can help spread the word and hopefully impact other people in a positive way. Where does it, what happens? What starts to go wrong that 20, 30, 40, 50 years down the road, and this isn't of everybody, but where a lot become very hardened and it's rules and structure and something that makes people go, I don't feel connected to this anymore?
Yeah, I think it's our natural inclination, the older that we get, to become more jaded, to become more self-centered, I think, just living in the world and doing life has that effect, on everybody. It beats you up. You can't help living in this world without getting a few wounds and bruises on you as you go through it. Maybe
Sure.
Maybe those wounds and bruises are from a supervisor who's just a jerk. Maybe it's from a spouse or somebody who just doesn't treat you in loving ways. Those things add up over the years. And I think that this is the real message of Christ, and the real message of the Bible is you can still have hope. You can still be a loving, caring person. You can still surmount everything that you have endured, but you're probably not going to be able to do it alone. You're going to need help doing that. And I think that help is always God. At least that's the way I understand scriptures. That help may be from God coming and speaking to you directly, like in this miraculous supernatural experience. Now, I don't think I've ever experienced that. Most of the time for me, God's help and God's love and God's peace and God's hope has come through other people. And a lot of times that has been people in the church. Sometimes the people in the church have been the ones inflicting the bruises and the wounds. I don't think those are God's people.
It's interesting that you said that, because I think a lot of people, when they hear someone such as yourself saying that the help comes from God, right? I know even myself, I think, well, I mean, I know I've and I don't pray a lot, but at times I do, and I hopefully try to be thankful during that period of time. But it's not as if you spend that time in quiet reflection that all of a sudden this message comes to you right in that moment. Maybe it does. But as you said, it tends to come through other people, right? Like you might ask for help, or you might need help at a particular time in your life. And if you pay attention, that it does show up in other areas. So are you saying that is sort of God working through other people to provide what people need?
That's what I believe.
Mm-hmm.
That really is what I believe. I call it God sightings or the fingerprints of God.
Mm-hmm.
And it is a perspective shift for a lot of us to, rather than look for the problems, to look for the hope, to look for the joy, to look for the places where people have given something to us unexpected out of nowhere. To me, those things are gifts from God. directly or indirectly. And I think, whenever I think of church and the reason why I'm so passionate about seeing that it happens around tables. And for 300 years, Chris, 300 years, church happened in homes around tables with food. It wasn't until like 400 years later, after the Bible was written, that they started building cathedrals and putting in pews. This was the way it was designed. And I think that the reason for that is because I have never been more blessed or felt like there was more sacred space in my life than sitting around the table sharing a drink with brothers from college, with sitting around the table with my grandparents sharing a home-cooked meal, with going out to eat with friends who were in town, who I hadn't been in connection with for a long time. Those to me are the most holy and sacred moments ever. And so I think that this is, in a way, what I'm hoping to recreate. And I think what God wants to give to people is that kind of environment, and not doing it to try to win people to Jesus. But I think what happens whenever you bring this synergy of people together, life happens, and people become more hopeful, people feel more loved, people experience more joy, and there's more peace. To me, those are the signs and the marks of God.
It's I couldn't agree with you more. This notion of gathering together is so valuable. So many people, they have their own experiences, they're carrying their own pain or whatever, but the community of coming together in an environment, particularly amongst people who are friends or who care about each other, and sharing a meal and laughing and talking, it's so healthy, right? It's just so good for people. And you look around the world. My wife is from Russia. She's Tatar, which is they are ethnic Turkic peoples who came under the rule of the Mongolian Empire. My wife's family is Muslim, and they grew up in Russia. When I go to Russia and spend time with them, it's the same thing, right? It's getting the family together, preparing food, and how much that means to put the effort in to do that together. And everywhere we travel together in Russia, small villages and stuff, it's the same experience. Not the same experience, but and I've talked to everybody here. And I have a guy whose family's from Turkey. Brad, his family is Italian. Everybody has their version of that, and everybody loves it. They value that so much.
Not here in
time
America.
Together. Well, and that's the strange thing. We've talked about that here too, and it's just we've become so darn sped up and under stress and pressure. So the things that helped make this country great was this entrepreneurial spirit, the drive, the determination, the work, making things happen, the American dream. So so many people invested so much in that, but then so much has been lost as a result of that just crazy devotion to either success or becoming something that, yes, that family element is just over the last 50 years just.
Yeah. And I think, Chris, there's no better time than right now to regain that. And I think a lot of people have. COVID has done a reset for a lot of people. It's given a lot of people a choice. I think there's more job changes happening now. Even in the pastorate, there are more people changing jobs now than ever before. But a lot of the marketplaces in the United States are experiencing that. People are reorienting their lives. They found out what it was like to be at home and to spend more time with their kids and to be able to take breaks from things and not be so devoted to the American dream, which is building something great, but then losing your family and losing yourself potentially in the process of doing that. So I think there's a lot of hope out there, and a lot of people have already begun to do that. And I hope that will continue, that we won't just go back to the way things were. I mean, obviously we gotta get back to work. We've got to have some semblance of normalcy come back. But I hope there's a new normal.
I hope so too. Do you think that if individual or family participation in the church experience is diminishing over time, is that also a hand-in-hand contributor, do you think, in some cases, to the diminishment of the family unit? Do you feel that in addition to, as a family, spending time together, but was the stronger connection to faith a meaningful part of that whole experience?
It's a good question. I'm not sure. I do think that there is something to be said for the family unit being central to who we are, I think, as Americans, and maybe we've lost sight of that. And I think for Christianity as well, the family unit is central as well. And I think the church in a lot of ways has lost sight of that too. The cool thing is, I think that the church can learn a lot from the world around it, in that the church has held on to a singular definition of family unit for a long time. And I think that's been a little counterproductive for the church. And so I think the church is slowly waking up and learning that family can look different in different places. And so I think, in some ways the church is behind and learning from the world. But I think we are all learning together the importance of family, or the importance of a community around you. Maybe a better way to say that today. As a dad, my community around me is my wife and my 4 kids most of the time. For many of us, that community around us may be our neighbors, maybe our friends, maybe our roommates, our college buddies. But I think for different people it looks different, but you need to have a support group.
Fundamentally, what you're saying is similar between this concept of church and even what it means to be family, that there's for years, for decades, hundreds of years, been these sort of strict definitions of what that means. And that's grown so rigid that people are blowing out of the system, right? Because they don't feel like they fit or belong or this style of communication doesn't work for them anymore. And with you, I would say hopefully that doesn't mean that they are losing faith in whatever they find meaningful in the concept of a higher power or a spiritual journey, or whatever that might be. But what you're doing with your direction now, and what you're saying is families, is recognizing that there's a new way coming into people's lives, and that in order to be able to improve the quality of families or be able to continue to communicate this message, it has to be done in a way that's fresh and modern and feels joyous for people to participate in.
Absolutely. I wanted to, as you were talking, I want to hit the table and shout bingo. But I also didn't want to terrify you. That's exactly right. I'm finding more of God in people outside the church sometimes than I'm finding inside the church. And to me, that's life-giving. The problem is that so many of these people feel like it's mutually exclusive. I have to be a part of a church, and that's where God happens. But outside of a church institution or building, I can't experience God or faith, or I'm not in alignment spiritually in life. And I look at those people and I say, actually, I think you're in more spiritual alignment than a lot of people I see here. And so I'm just drawn to helping those people who don't feel like they fit understand it may be that you don't fit in this current United States expression of the church. That doesn't mean that you don't fit with God.
It's interesting to listen to this. In a way, it sounds as if you're you're starting anew, right? Like this is a new chapter.
My wife has called me a revolutionary, or my counselor, I think, actually called me a revolutionary.
Well, great, that's fantastic, because
I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, because a lot of revolutionaries, they die.
I mean, you're not Che Guevara, But I want to take this moment from this moment in time and actually hit the reverse button and back up to when you first began, right? I'm curious to hear some perspective and stories of what it was like when you said, okay, I'm working in sound and AV and video production, all stuff in churches.
Yeah.
I've resisted this for whatever reason for a long time, but now I feel the calling to become a pastor, and you make the steps to do that. And I can only imagine that must have been terrifying.
Yeah, it was.
Joyous, humiliating, and hysterical.
Yeah, I was dumb. I was young. I was dumb. I think I needed a lot of those experiences, though. Sometimes you just have to have those moments where you mess up. You learn through your mistakes.
Sure. And
I had a lot of them. I didn't know what I was doing. Yeah, I tried to pretend like I knew what I was doing, but people were very gracious, and I don't know. I was trying to think of any crazy stories. None of them come to mind, but I think that's because I've tried to forget all of those moments. And we've all had them, right? When you're in a new job and you're trying to impress people,
sure,
and not let others know that you're sweating it.
Yep. You don't totally know what you're doing, but you got a lot of enthusiasm. You have a lot of passion. You feel like you've prepared yourself, and you find yourself in these very interesting environments doing what you do. Is that the case for you? I would imagine. I'm juxtaposing to my own career and thinking of presentations that I've made in crazy places and dealerships and all this stuff. And it's not the same thing, but it's still getting up in front of a group of people and sharing something with them that you hope they respond to favorably. Yeah,
there is not a lot of difference between creating a website or a video and preaching a sermon. I mean, it's a real short. You're trying to get people to buy into an idea, or trying to get them to understand the value of something that you're trying to do. And in a lot of ways, it kind of became a little counterproductive for me, honestly, Chris, because it was a little like selling Jesus, and I felt a little like a salesperson.
Right.
Because of my background in communications, I knew kind of what I needed to say, or how I needed to say it, or how to effectively use a pause in a moment, or when to raise the voice inflection, do all of that. And I had to kind of do a gut check and say, this isn't an opportunity to manipulate people. This is an opportunity to just simply be yourself, and not be polished, and not be perfect, and just go to what you believe and share that story. And from there, it's God's work.
But that can only come with time and maturity and experience, right?
I don't know that I'm mature. Hopefully that day will come where no, you are exactly right.
But because you're talking about you're talking about what are fundamentally the skills and craft of your trade to some degree, right? The ability to have an idea and or a message that it is that you want to convey. What's the best way to convey it, right?
Right.
And at the same time, to do it in a way that's as authentic as possible. But when you're first starting off, aren't you kind of going for the win a little bit? You know, right? Yeah. And there's nothing wrong with that, because that's part of the process, right?
Exactly. And the cool thing is, Chris, I say God gets blamed for a lot of things he didn't do. I don't know. Something goes, something good happens in someone's life. Well, God did that for me. That was God's work. Well, I don't know. It might have just been that you made a really good decision there. Mm-hmm. It might not have been God. But I do think, even the fact that I was so interested in communications and those things before I ended up in the pastorate was a bit of a gift to me, because in those days the church wasn't using technology at all. They were like two separate fields. But just about the time that I got into the pastorate was also just about the time that video and audio and websites and all these things, the church kind of realized instead of avoiding these things, we should actually be using these things. And so I don't know that I ever would have been able to be effective as a pastor without having all of that background. For me, it was like a huge gift to be able to have that other discipline as a background. And I say that God gave that to me. that was a gift, but maybe it was also just good timing as well. But it has definitely. I find on many days that I'm more of a tech guy in my role as pastor than I am a counselor. But for me, it's, as you said, it's all just a part of the tool set that's necessary, as you mature, to do whatever it is that needs to be done to help people become, like I said earlier, to become more human, to become better individuals and better people. And for me, obviously, clearly, I believe that happens best in a relationship with God and with Jesus, with some sort of deep spirituality. And so for me, I want to help people become better. And I think people of faith should be the best well-rounded, loving, peaceful, joyful, hopeful people on the planet. And if not, then something's wrong in the matrix somewhere.
Right. Yeah, I would agree with that. I'm curious, to you, fundamentally, if you were to distill down the teachings of Jesus Christ, like what is, if there was a short, if you had your elevator speech, right, on why Jesus is such a fundamental figure, what is that? Like what? I know it's obvious, but I'm curious to hear it from your perspective.
For me, the first thing that popped into my mind is love one another as I've loved you. Jesus showed a radical kind of love that loved one another, that loved other people. Oftentimes it's like, love your neighbor as yourself. Some people just love themselves. Lots of people say, well, okay, love other people, like you want to be loved. And Jesus says, no, none of those standards are high enough. Let me show you as God. Let me show you what love really looks like, and love people like that. Do your best to love people like that. And if you read the Bible, Jesus was, all right, we're back to the table. Jesus was having meals with the way the Bible describes it as prostitutes and sinners and thieves and people who were not on even just the lowest rung of the ladder, but were not even on a rung of the ladder. And Jesus is sharing meals with them all the time, which in the first century, you have a meal with somebody, it means you are validating who they are. You wouldn't ever sit down at a table with somebody unless you were willing to validate and accept who they are. And so Jesus having meals with all of these people so angers the religious people, so angers the community, that if you read it closely enough, it's one of the primary reasons why they crucify him, because he had what would be called table fellowship with other people. To me, that's Jesus showing a radical kind of love that we need to be showing for others as well. That's why it gets so under my skin whenever the church takes on the LGBTQI issue. It's why it so gets under my skin whenever the church aligns itself with a certain politic or with a certain president, and in order to exclude other people. So why it so gets under my skin whenever somebody says to me, I don't think I can ever go to church again. They just didn't accept me. It makes me angry because this is not at all the life that Jesus modeled. And to me, that's to love other people the way I have shown you how to love other people. And so if you're not loving people that way, I don't know who you're looking to, but you're not looking at Jesus.
Right. It's the biggest disappointment, I know for myself, and I would imagine for millions of people, is this total Jesus worship, right? Yet this total disassociation and rejection of who he truly was as a human being and what he stood for. They are so diametrically opposed. That's why people are so sick of religion.
Yeah,
because,
me too.
Yeah,
me too.
It's just like they can't see. There's no connection to what it really meant. And particularly now, this world that we live in with the 24-hour news cycle and social media and divisive politics and everybody's against each other, if there was ever a time, for him to come back down and say, hey, let me show you how this is supposed to be, now's probably a good time. Now, I don't know if
it does seem like it, yeah.
But it's really a shame to see what's happening with people. And this, and I think it's so much as just pain and fear that builds up and manifests itself in people in such negative ways. But you've got these huge structured religions that have nothing to do with what he came to teach us.
Yeah, it breaks my heart.
Yeah, it's a sad thing.
And it hurts other people. And to me, that makes God angry whenever he is used, as you said, whenever Jesus is used to cause other people harm and hurt. It's so total 180 degrees. I just feel like he's going to come back down with a whip in his hands. If he shows back up again, I think he's going to show up with a whip in his hands. And I don't want to be a part of anything that Jesus is going to take a whip to.
Yeah, that's not the Jesus we want to see,
that
right?
That fear thing, though, is so true. You know, you've said it a couple of times that it's fear, and I think you're exactly right. Whenever we are afraid of something, we try to control it, and I think a lot of people try to control Jesus out of fear.
Well, because people try to control a lot as a result of fear, you know. But fundamentally, and I am a Christian, but I don't profess to say that Christianity is the only way. Clearly there's multiple ways for multiple millions of people, if not billions of people around the world. But fundamentally, I think for people that are seeking goodness, right, there is, for a lot of people, this notion that, okay, there is some sort of afterlife that we don't fully understand, right. maybe bits and pieces, either been what's been told to us, or for some people who might feel that they are more enlightened, maybe they've had multiple lifetimes and they have, a little bit of a sense of this, but in my belief, there is some sort of great spiritual entity or universe or whatever it is that we're all trying to figure out or perhaps get back to. We're all on different journeys at different stages in our development. And nobody really knows for sure, except for what has been told through us, handed down over the generations through historical text, through biblical text, through the Quran. And I'm not going to say any of this right because I don't know enough. Or through prophets, whatever it is given us glimpses into this. And then we as mortal humans have somehow said, okay, well, that means this, and this means that, and that means this. And then through our own fear and not really knowing what happens, then it's like so many people construct these systems that's all we can do because we don't know any better.
You're exactly right, man. I in biblical scholarship, that's called certainty, and there's a lot of ongoing argument lately about certainty. What can you be certain of? What can you not be certain of? And it's real divisive. But I think you've made a great point, is that there really, at the end of the day, isn't a lot that we can be certain about. There are a few things, but most of the things we try to be certain about when it comes to religion, like the afterlife, as you said, I've not been there. I don't know. I know what I think it's going to be, but I can't be certain of that. And I think in some ways, a lot of what we have in the Bible is really trying to convince us, don't be so sure about everything. But the one thing you can be sure about is that God is in control of the whole world. God loves you, and it's going to be okay. And it's going to be a little easier if you'll just follow my example and follow me. That's all the certainty I need. Everything else, who cares?
Right.
Who cares? Who cares what the afterlife is? I'll know when I get there.
That's right. That's right. It's like, worrying about something that you have absolutely zero control over. What's the point, right?
Yeah, well, a lot of us do it.
Yeah, that's for sure. I'm curious, as a father myself, I have 2 young children. You have 4 children. As men who are parents and fathers, not to suggest that because we're men with wives that's the only way, but as men in our family units, this is our opportunity to share and teach, right, the ways of the world or whatever we believe. How do you instill some of this stuff in your children, and how do they respond? Pastor Kevin.
I'm still learning.
Right.
As a pastor, I have a whole lot of influence over my kids, but I don't have a lot of influence over what they believe.
Right.
In fact, the real danger for me is that I will teach one thing but live something else. Like I'll say, be loving, be hopeful, be joyful, be peaceful, and I'll be the most angry, self-centered, unloving, worthless piece of crap. I don't know if I can say that.
You can say whatever you want.
In the house. Well, in that case, I'll take the filter.
Yeah, we've
off.
got no filter in this room.
My wife says you never want them unfiltered. And so the real danger is actually that I'm going to be maybe a counterproductive influence on my kids. And so one of the things I try to do is just try to be transparent in who I am, and when I struggle or when I fail, own up to it. That's not easy for me. I don't know if it's just because of the way I'm wired or just because I'm a man. And sometimes men struggle with that. But saying I'm sorry is super difficult sometimes for me, especially to a 5-year-old. It's especially hard to a middle schooler to say I'm sorry, because they'll hold on to that.
Oh yeah,
yeah,
right.
They'll hold on to that. But you know what? Surrounding them with other people who are good influences has been important. And a lot of times we try to do that with friends. We try to control like who their friends are, and that doesn't work really in my experience. They're going to choose who they want as friends. I may be able to have a little bit of influence over that, but not much in the long run. What I try to do is to give them other great examples of adults in their world who I have a lot of confidence in. And those people in a lot of ways do as much or more of the spiritual parenting of my kids as I do. And so it becomes a little bit more of a reinforcing, whenever they see other people who believe the same things and act the same way, then it's really helpful. I'll tell you the other thing that I noticed, Chris, over the last few months was that I'm teaching and preaching this table idea that everything spiritual, family, relationally happens best around food at tables. I realized we didn't have a table in our house. Like, well, okay, this is this is a little hypocritical.
That's hysterical.
But I've been chasing this table thing because I saw it in the Bible and I saw it in my own family history, my family of origin. And then I was like, I'm a complete and utter failure as a father. I've completely overlooked like the impact of my own family of what I'm teaching. And so we would eat in front of the TV, or we had these stools around a bar stool counter.
Funny.
And so you know what? So like I can fix this. This I can do. I may not be able to like teach Ecclesiastes or Leviticus to my kids, but I can model something else to them. And so I went to a wood shop and I bought like an insane amount of way too expensive wood, because in Jupiter where I live, everything's
Right.
insanely expensive. But I bought great wood. And I brought it home and I dug out all the power tools and stuff. And over the last 3 weeks, I've been building a family table. And in fact, I was kind of grumbling this morning. I'm like, I really want to work on these benches. I don't know when I want to go do this podcast. So I'm like in the throes of building this thing for the family. And the kids are away at camp for 2 weeks. And when they come home in 8 days, there will be a table and benches that will seat our family and 2 more, because I always hope that there are going to be more people around our table than just our family.
That is fucking hysterical. That is the funniest thing I've heard in a long time.
And so, yeah, like I built this thing with my own hands. And it's like a mess. Don't look too closely at it. But I'm like, this is going to be mine. And this is going to be ours. And,
it conjures an image of somebody in your family saying, "Okay, Pastor Kevin, I hear you talking about this table. Where's our table? Where's our? Oh, I didn't think about that. It's that, but that's the kind of stuff that just happens when you get so involved with what you're doing.
Exactly.
That sometimes you can overlook something that is blatantly obvious, right? And hysterical. It's so funny.
Yeah. So we've got a new table. My wife's like, you should build these things for people. Nope. Just one. I've only got one in me.
That's great. I keep having, more questions, right? So I'm thinking about what you're saying, and I'm wondering if when you were debate, and because you're saying it essentially now as well too, when you were making the decision, okay, do I move in to be a pastor, was some of the fear the realization that you'd have to walk the walk?
Yeah, I'm a mess. I am. I'm not perfect. People want their spiritual leaders. Maybe they want all their leaders. I don't know. But the only area that I'm really an expert in is spiritual leadership. People want their spiritual leaders to be perfect, and that wasn't me. I know my baggage. I know my mess, and I'm just not the type of guy who wants to tell somebody else what to do if I'm not. If I'm not,
you don't want to be a hypocrite. Like that's fundamentally. I go through that as well too, where it's like, this as a leader, you realize that you're responsible and that you have to carry yourself in a certain way and conduct yourself a certain way. And I think as men, we're sort of taught that, whatever you grew up in, there was always these leaders that existed, right? Vince Lombardi or whoever it may be. And that's just the first thing that comes to my mind because my dad from years ago. But you get this sense in your mind that there are these men or women, if it doesn't matter, but I'm just using this in the context here, that they are walking the walk 100% of the time. And I think that we would find that those people don't have it all figured out either.
Well, I was thinking when you said that, now I don't know about Lombardi, but oftentimes whenever I have somebody who is like a giant, whether it's a spiritual giant or a leadership guru or someone who, I have a lot of respect for, 10 years later, someone will write a biography of them that just totally like shows the story you didn't know about.
Sure.
In fact, the latest book I picked up was about Washington, George Washington. It was kind of the same thing. It was like the father of our country, but you really didn't know all of these other things about him. I didn't want to be that guy. I didn't want to be that pastor. I didn't want to be that person who people looked up to, and then if I were to say the wrong word or drink the wrong drink or vote in the wrong way for, people like just... And I finally realized, Chris, I don't want people following me. And I think that any pastor, any church that sets up that model, it's the wrong model. They should be looking at Jesus. And so I'm like, that was what gave me in a lot of ways the freedom to be who I was, but to also be a leader in spiritual things, is to say, you can mirror and do what I do, but at the end of the day, you really just need to be looking at Jesus, not at me. And I've kind of modeled that too around our family as well. As a dad, I think you started the question with as a dad with kids. I don't know that I want my kids looking at my example. I want them to have a greater example, a better example than me. And so I say, look at your mom. Well, and look to Jesus, but she's probably about as close to Jesus as I hope you're watching. No. But in a lot of ways too, that has freed me up to be an alongside-er with people, and to be an alongside with my kids. Not necessarily my friend. I know I still have a father. I still have a leadership role. Every mother has a leadership role. You've got to lead by example, and yada yada yada, all of those things. But at the end of the day, I really want my kids to be better than me in a lot of different ways. And it's a real eye-opening moment whenever you realize they're never going to be better than you are. They're never going to be better than I am if I'm their primary example. And so I've got to find other people and point them to Jesus too. And the same plays both in the family and in the church. Church people are only going to be as good as I am. I can only take them as far as I've gone. But if they're looking and following somebody else, then run. You go further than me.
That's a powerful statement, as a father, to suggest, hey, I want to be a positive influence and I want to help guide you, but I may not, and I probably am not the ideal role model for you. I am just one of perhaps many teachers that will be here to help guide you along.
Well, and if I'm on this pedestal, at some point I'm going to trip and fall off of that thing. And if they're only looking at me, that's going to have a real detrimental effect on them. And so, I mean, I've got to own it with them. You know, I've got to be a good example, I think, and teach them. But at the end of the day, I don't want to be their God.
Right.
You know, I don't want to be the thing that they look to and hang all of their hopes and dreams and example on.
Well, and that's tough for a child to be in the position of looking to somebody, you know. I mean, to some degree, I did that with my dad. My dad forged a path that I realized that in an attempt to get my own closeness with him, I followed into. And I'm at this stage in my life, I'm realizing that, okay, that only can take me so far, right? The next phase has to be me taking that and going further with it. And so that can take a child a long time to process through. So it's interesting that you're communicating that now. I thought of one additional thing, going back to this concept of looking to leaders and thinking that they've got it all worked out. For literally billions of people through history, not all of the inhabitants of the planet Earth, but many, Jesus Christ has been portrayed perhaps as the ultimate walk the walk person.
Yeah.
Is it safe to say that even Jesus maybe wasn't Jesus all the time?
Well,
and if so,
that's a really good question. I think, it would probably be theologically dangerous for me to say Jesus wasn't perfect. But I will say there is no record in the Bible of anything that he did between the ages of 12 and 30 or so. So I don't know what happened in all of those years that wasn't recorded, but I'll just say I'm also thankful that social media wasn't around during my adolescence, and there's not this whole history of everything that I went through in growing up and maturing. And I think that there's this whole part of the record of Jesus that isn't there either. Why it's not there, I don't know.
Well, I mean, number one, yes, it's probably a good thing that there were no documentarians following him around at the time. And, as the story tells, as the, ordained Son of God.
It's a lot of pressure.
Sure.
I mean, my dad was tough, but imagine.
Yeah. And at what age? Did he always know it? Did he not?
I don't think he always did.
And so in order to get to a point at 32, 33, where he is now Jesus Christ, sitting and communing with prostitutes and thieves, and it would suggest a pathway to there that led him through all kinds of different experiences, and there could have been ups and downs, and I guess
there had to be.
We don't know it, but I guess what I'm saying is maybe everybody should take faith in, and this is me saying because I'm not a pastor, so I get to say this, is I'm sure Jesus was human too in ways that
absolutely.
We can give ourselves a little slack sometimes for not being perfect and not always walking the walk, because it's okay sometimes to not be okay.
Absolutely. I mean, I think theologically the church in general kind of understands Jesus to be 100% God. But then there's also 100% human. It's not like 50-50. Like he was half God, he was half human. No, he was fully God, but he was also 100% fully human. The Bible actually spells out he was tempted, he struggled, he faced all of the same things that any normal man would face. To me, that gives me great comfort. In fact, when you jump into the story of Jesus, when it picks back up the story in around the age of 30 or so, his brothers and sisters, his family, they really won't have anything to do with this ministry. They essentially kind of reject him and say he's crazy. We don't know or understand who this guy is, but he may be insane. There may be like a mental illness or something that's going on here. Something needs to be done about him. And I think we all can relate to this idea of not having the support sometimes of the people that we love. They may see you, they may see me for who we were in our 20s. Some of the things that we did there, and it's like, I'm not that person. anymore. You know, I'm different. I wish that you could see me for who I am today and what I'm doing now, and that you could let that stuff go. We all face that. Jesus did too.
I think that's a really great place to pause our conversation, because I, A, have thoroughly enjoyed this, and B, hope that we'll have many more in the times to come, because I've enjoyed this greatly. Kevin, it's been a pleasure to have you here.
Thanks for having me on, Chris.
And what I would like to say now would be if there's anything that you'd like to share with the audience in terms of how they can find you, how any one of us can help you on this journey. It's plug time, if you will.
Yeah, it's real simple. Our website is Christ Table, Christ plural with an S, so ChristTable.today.
It's a great URL. I love it. The .today is awesome.
.today. Yeah, that was my middle schooler's idea. I was running through a whole bunch of stuff with her. She's like, "That's the one." I'm like, "That's crazy. It has to be .com." She's like, "Dad, you're so 1990s." I'm like, I don't think that was a good thing. And so yeah, it's ChristTable.today, and part of that I think is great because it puts the table at central place, and then today, you know, it's all about this moment and capturing the moment. And so yeah, you can find out a little bit more about me and about us and who we are and what we're doing and where we're going there.
Great. Well, I hope and encourage that everybody that's listening and watching does take some time out of their day to visit your website and check you out, because I think you're a real special guy with a special mission that you're on, and if there's anything that I can do or we can do to be helpful, we're here.
Thanks, Chris. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Kevin. I enjoyed it. Cheers. At the table. The table's so long, I always say at some point in time we might have to get a shorter table.